Welcome back to Black Belt Secrets. I thought I'd come to you from a slightly different location today. This is Branston Water Park. Now, with all the mayhem that's going on in the UK press at the moment, I thought I'd talk a little bit about free speech, give you my personal opinions on things. Now, there's been lots of people going to prison for things that they've been posting on Facebook. And lots of people have been saying that that is overreach and erosion of free speech in the UK. Now, my personal opinion on this is a little bit of a double attack, because on the one hand, I am an avid supporter of free speech and we should be able to say what we wish. But at the same time, I also don't advocate the incitement of violence and encouraging harm to other people. I don't think, however much somebody wants to fight for free speech, I don't think anybody should really be advocating for that. And indeed, the law, both in the UK and the US, doesn't protect such things. So if you are found to be inciting harm and violence on somebody else, then the law does step in and provide offences for that. We have communications offences, we have public order offences, and particularly with the fairly controversial Scottish law, where some of these things can be in your own home, doesn't afford you the defence of being in your own private home with no one else likely to hear it anymore. So some of those things are pretty controversial, whereas in public order law in England and Wales, it is a defence if you're in your own home and nobody outside of your dwelling is likely to hear it, likely to be offended or to stir up any kind of hatred in that regard. And then we have a further comparison between the UK and the US in that the freedom of speech is a First Amendment right in the United States, is much more strongly protected, in my opinion, than freedom of expression in the UK. I think, regardless of what I've said about not inciting violence and harm to other people, it is very much more strongly protected in the US than the UK, in my view. And so people essentially quite rightly find themselves being really cautious as to what they say online, particularly in recent days. I'm going to turn this around so you can see some view. I'm going to do an Al Roberts-Shaw on you. So if you're not familiar, from Art of Law, I'll link him in the description below, where I turn you around so you can see the view that I'm looking at here as well without falling over the edge and drowning myself. So Al's risking falling off the edge of cliffs, I'm risking falling into a big lake. This is Branston Water Park. It's quite a nice place here. We just almost got attacked by some swans on the way up here. So a very nice place to walk around while talking to you about law. And so people are quite rightly really worried about what they're posting online. And even people have started worrying about having arguments and conversations with each other while they're online as well, because if they are just having an argument, a spat online, we've seen cases, I can't think of all the citations off the top of my head, but we've seen cases that have gone to court. I will link one below if I remember. I'm going to change arms because I've hurt my arm the other day. I'm always injuring something. I don't know how I injure these things. In fact, this was just because I was moving my gym weights around the gym, rearranging the gym as I often do, as you probably noticed in the background to my main videos. But I referenced another case where there was a whole Twitter argument spat between a couple of people, and it went to court. She was prosecuted for being annoying, for having these annoying tweets. The law specified that as being unnecessary anxiety. And I think that's a bit silly. My personal opinion, I think is a little bit silly to say that someone can have needless anxiety, just a little bit more anxiety than perhaps you would otherwise have just going about your business without anyone ever saying anything. What kind of society is it where you can just go around and expect to never be offended, never be upset, never be given any anxiety? Well, quite frankly, it's just a byproduct of living in society. We have to be tolerant of each other, but I think we also have to expect some kind of anxiety and disagreements. If you disagree with somebody, what happens if you, let's say you have building work done on your house, and then you have a really heated discussion with the people that have done the work on your house? if they've done really bad work, shoddy work, and you're going back and forth telling them what you think of them and the work that they've done on your house, because it's your house, you might be really upset about it if the work's a really shoddy standard. What sort of protection are they supposed to have if you're causing them needless anxiety? Because the law on the one hand might say, well, you should be able to just say, please come and do the work, please put it right. Whereas actually you might feel like putting that in much stronger terms and saying, this is absolute rubbish. How are you a builder, you're a cowboy builder, or whatever you might want to say. You might want to express your personal views to them, and that might legally be causing them needless anxiety. Should the law protect them from that? I'm not so sure. I think that is going really over the top to protect someone's feelings at the expense of the freedom of expression. I think you should be able to express yourself freely and have these conversations and discussions without too much interference from the law. And so where does that leave us with public posts and Facebook posts, X posts, or Twitter if you absolutely insist? Well, if you're making those comments online and you're having those discussions online, then I've got some kind of fly thing landing on my, actually, some really interesting kind of mothy type thing landing on my camera here. Came to say hello and disappeared. Where does that leave us with Facebook posts and Twitter posts and things like that? Well, the law is not really going to interfere, as I've said in previous videos, in my opinion, and shouldn't do, in my opinion, unless you are really inciting harm, violence, and other kind of serious unrest that is imminent, that is a real threat. Or as I've recently learnt, fighting words is one of the restrictions to the freedom of speech under the First Amendment in the United States. And so unless you are actually calling somebody out for fights, it's quite overgrown here with nettles and you're getting stung all over the place. Unless you are actually calling someone out with fighting words to come and fight now, let's have it out now, or unless you are actually saying someone should go and do this now, which is why we've seen people going to prison for fairly extensive prison terms, which I'll come to in a minute, fairly extensive prison terms just for what they've said about certain things on Facebook. Now, turning to those, they have been some fairly serious statements on Facebook and the like to say people should go and smash things up or burn things down. That should obviously be wrong to say those things. But then comes my opinion, does that really warrant such a prison sentence that these have been getting, which is, 20 months, a couple of years, 2-3 years or whatever? Again, my personal opinion is I think that's a bit harsh, because we've seen much other sentences that have been much less severe, and the offences have actually been quite horrendous. But the reason is, I believe, the reason these sentences have been passed is to make it absolutely clear that if you participate in these riots, violent disorder, that the judges are going to punish you for it. Now, to be clear as well, it really ought to be said that the judiciary is entirely separate from government. And so it really should be, and I would trust that it is and should be separate from government. And so it is the judges making the call to hand down these sentences. And they are very severe. And so I think the judges applying these sentences are doing so, particularly when they've been pleading guilty, and it's been dealt with very quickly, very sternly. But remember, these offences are in place. So the law is in place to provide for these. The judges don't decide who is being prosecuted. The judges are applying these sentences according to the sentencing guidelines when people have been brought to court and prosecuted. And so if they've been charged, they've got the choice to plead guilty or not guilty, and the judges deal with them accordingly. So those are my views on that. And I'll talk to you a bit more from somewhere else.
Now, the other thing that I promised I would give you my opinions on is all of this stuff to do with Elon Musk. Now, there's yet another one that's popped up in my feed just before I hit record, But the first of these is with Sir Mark Rowley of the Met Police, who had hinted to a Sky News reporter that they would look to people further afield online, and obviously hinting at Elon Musk. Well, the reporter directly referenced Elon Musk and said that they wouldn't be safe from their laws and they would go after them as well. As I explained in my main channel Black Belt Barrister videos, if they were to do that, they would have to seek extradition, there would have to be dual criminality, and satisfy all that criteria if they were to try to bring Elon Musk over here for prosecution. Now, the short version is that is not going to happen, and quite frankly, I think it's a little bit of a far stretch to have said that in an interview, because it is so far-fetched. Now, if he were making really strong incitement to violence and hatred, and he's really cheering people on, which he wasn't doing, but if he were doing all of that stuff, then fine. And I do support the police generally in everything that I do and say. I do support the police. They have a difficult job and they do try to keep the streets safe and everything else. But I do think it would be a bit of a stretch of the imagination for someone to actually think that that is going to happen, that anyone would actually extradite Elon Musk to the UK for prosecution for any of these things. Because the things that he's said, I've seen are far from anything that would qualify as any sort of offence that would have dual criminality for the purposes of extradition. It's just not going to happen. The second of which was with Humza Yousaf and the spat they had. So he did the CNN interview, and it's quite a silly statement in my personal opinion when he said that he's one of the most dangerous men on the planet, or words to that effect. I think that's really silly, particularly considering the sort of people that we have seen in our history, recent history, and some people might argue that there are people around the world that are far more dangerous than Elon Musk, who, okay, he's opinionated, he has a platform with hundreds of millions of users, fine, and people say that he has influence because of that. But at the same time, just because he says something doesn't mean everyone's going to follow it. And regardless of the following and the reach and so on, the things that he has said doesn't come close to being dangerous in the sense that many other people have in our recent history. And so I think that was quite an inflammatory and quite a ridiculous thing to say, in my respectful, humble opinion, which I'm entitled to and I'm entitled to express. And the third of which, literally before I hit record, from Thierry Breton of the EU Commission, there's a letter here that's been published. I don't know why it's been published. It is said that it's been sent to Elon Musk. It says here, I sent this to Elon Musk. So why is it public? I mean, it's obviously been made public for people to read, which itself is a bit odd, but it's almost telling everybody, announcing to the world, here's what we're telling Elon Musk. And it says, I'm writing. This is in the context of the upcoming interview with Donald Trump. This letter says, I'm writing to you in the context of recent events in the United Kingdom and in relation to the planned broadcast on your platform X of a live conversation between US presidential candidate, i.e. Donald Trump, and yourself, which will be accessible to users in the EU. I understand that you are currently doing a stress test of the platform. In this context, I'm compelled to remind you of the due diligence obligations set out in the Digital Services Act as outlined in my previous letter. As the individual entity ultimately controlling a platform with over 300 million users worldwide, of which 1/3 are in the EU, that has been designated a very large online platform. You have a legal obligation to ensure X's compliance with EU law, etc., etc. But it says, ironically, this notably means ensuring, on the one hand, freedom of expression and information, including media freedom and pluralism, are effectively protected, and on the other hand, that all proportionate and effective mitigation measures are in place regarding the amplification of harmful content in connection with relevant events, etc., etc. And the covering tweet says, as there is a risk of amplification of potentially harmful content in the EU in connection with events and major audience around the world, I sent this letter to Elon Musk. But who defines what is potentially harmful? And whilst it acknowledges on the one hand that they need to protect the freedom of expression, also taking all proportionate steps to mitigate the spread of harmful material. Now, of course, they can do that, but anyone spreading such material, if they weren't spreading it on X, they'd spread it somewhere else, or somewhere else, or somewhere else. And if they close all of those down, then isn't that just censoring freedom of expression? Now, of course, if you take the most extreme examples, it is right to mitigate the dissemination of the most harmful material, or material that is likely to incite harm and violence and things like that. That's fine. But at the same time, what has that really got to do with an interview with Donald Trump, as against Donald Trump doing an interview with anybody else? I've already seen some people online suggesting in their opinion that this is somehow interfering, because I suppose they all know that this is going to garner a wide audience, and obviously it's going to be a very popular conversation between Elon Musk and Donald Trump. Lots of people are going to watch it. So what is this really? What is the main purpose of this letter? Is it just make sure that you are complying with these things to mitigate the dissemination of harmful, potentially harmful material, or what? And then at the end of the letter, there's this warning here. It says, let me clarify that any negative effect of illegal content on X in the EU, which could be attributed to the ineffectiveness of the way in which X applies its relevant provisions of the DSA, may be relevant to the context of the ongoing proceedings and the overall assessment, because obviously there's ongoing proceedings with regard to the Digital Services Act against X. And it says, notably, linked to dissemination of illegal content and the effectiveness of the measures taken to combat disinformation. Now, given the irony that some people say that a person of one country should not comment on or interfere with the operations and the politics of another country, this just really proves the point that if a platform crosses boundaries and borders, then one should be able to comment on it. And you can probably gather from the comment section underneath that there's a lot of discussion about free speech and whether or not this appears to be in support of free speech or not. Let's just say in summary that a lot of people that I've read so far are not supportive. One just at random says here, as an EU citizen, this is David Mori, says here, as an EU citizen, I strongly disagree with this approach. We are able to make our own choices and decide as adults what we want to listen to and what not. If these are the rules, this level of censorship should be applied to every talk show in the EU on every channel as well, not only X, and not only to some specific topics. So genuine comment left there, and I, for what it's worth, agree. Why specifically isolate and target this interview with Donald Trump? On the other hand, there's Dennis Daly says here, as a social psychologist, I strongly disagree with what has just been commented. I often demonstrate to people how easily they can be influenced and manipulated. This includes people with degrees. My advice is to read up on social influence and political psychology as they overlap. But again, I mean, that's a fair comment by Dennis Daly, but at the same time, and with all respect, most people don't have a psychology degree. Most people will not read up on psychology. Does that mean everything should be censored because they think people are stupid? That's a little bit like saying that people should read up on the law before we let them do anything. And, they're only allowed to do something once they've read up on the law, because obviously that doesn't really make any sense, does it? Because ignorance of the law is no defense. But one criticism I have of most legal systems is that they are now so complex and convoluted that most people just simply don't understand it. So even talking about our freedom of speech or freedom of expression laws and how they overlap and how case law has applied and interpreted and refined and defined the law in these areas, people just don't understand it. It takes us as lawyers hours to read through these cases and get a full understanding of how this law would apply to a specific set of facts. With respect to everyone watching, how on earth will non-lawyers make any sense of all of that? Quite frankly, I think most people don't. And in response to this comment just here, the same goes with the psychology, the social psychology of all of the same. Whereas if you insist that everyone should understand the social psychology behind it, else it should be censored, that is just becoming a censorship and a dictatorship, and that is not the world that most of us want to live in. Most of us do want the free choice. We do want to be able to make our own decisions, our own conclusions, and regardless of any propaganda. I mean, propaganda has been around for as long as we've had any kind of broadcast system, any kind of telegraph system. Propaganda has been there, and you either listen to it, you're either affected by it or not. So this obviously went off on quite a few different tangents here, but there's a lot of discussion here. It is never a straightforward, this is the answer, this is what should happen, this is what you should do, this is what you shouldn't do. There's a lot of nuance to all of this discussion. And at the end of the day, if they want to censor the whole platform and they want to censor who listens to what, when and where else, they come punishing the platforms because something nasty is found on there, I think we're on a slippery slope to censorship and dictatorship. And so quite openly, I think, unless you find material, I mean, of course, if the systems on X and the people that run X do find material that is directly harmful, directly inciting violence, obviously that crosses the line, that should be removed. And I'm sure that they can and do take all steps that they can reasonably take to mitigate and remove and prevent the dissemination of that kind of illegal, unlawful and abhorrent material. And if not, then this letter's got some point to it. If they don't do that, then this letter does have a point. But of course, that is down to the platform. So those are my views on that. I don't think there's any crystal clear answer here. All I know is, as a lawyer and as a citizen, I would like to lean in the direction of a free society rather than being overly convoluted and restricted with these laws and regulations, which most people are not familiar with, most people won't understand. And even if you get a lawyer, let's say you get a lawyer that specializes in, I don't know, tax and property and trusts, they won't necessarily understand media law and communications law and defamation law and all of that sort of stuff. So if a lawyer that specializes in one area doesn't understand the law in another, then what chance does the general public have of understanding those laws and knowing what they can and can't do, else be breaking those laws and be held responsible for them? That's one of the criticisms that I've seen on discussions in social media platforms, where people have been imprisoned for dozens of months for offences on social media where they've posted something. Now, some people have argued that they didn't understand that would be wrong or illegal, that they could go to prison for it, etc. But again, ignorance is no defence of the law, and if you break those laws, you can be punished for it. So when they post those things, they can obviously be punished if they break the law and cross a threshold. But how do you feel about that if you don't know what those laws are? How do you feel about the prospect of being punished fairly severely, as I've described in this video so far and in my other videos? Fairly heavy and severe punishments for things that you may not have understood before committing those things and taking those actions. Let me know what you think in the comments, because this is the kind of discussion that I want to open up with you here on Black Belt Secrets. So please do subscribe for this open, free-flowing thought and conversation, because it is very nuanced. There's a lot going on here, and I want this open, true, and faithful discussion with you here. Let me know in the comments, politely and respectfully, please. In the comments, let me know what you think and which direction you want this conversation to go, because I'm all ears. So thank you for watching, thank you for your comments, thank you for subscribing, and I'll see you next time.